Every time I start talking about it, I can hear how it sounds. I can hear how it comes off, like I'm either exaggerating or trying to scare people or trying to turn something into more than it was. And I'm not. I don't like scary stories. I don't watch horror movies. I don't go looking for weird stuff online. I grew up in a place where people mind their business and explain things in practical ways. Animals, weather, drunk trespassers, that kind of stuff. So I've always had this habit of trying to explain it to myself in normal terms. Even now, even after all these years. I still try to put it into some kind of box that makes sense. It never quite fits. I grew up on a family ranch in a rural part of the state. Not those picture-perfect ranches you see in movies with big white fences and wide open flat land. Ours was kind of rough around the edges. Some open pasture, some wooded areas, some uneven ground, rocky in places. It had been in my family for a few generations, passed down, divided up, stitched back together, sold off in pieces and bought back. By the time I was a kid, it wasn't some big operation. We had a few head of cattle, some horses, chickens, and a couple of outbuildings that were always half falling apart. The woods were always there. That's the thing people don't always picture when you say ranch. They imagine open fields, but a good chunk of our land backed up to thick woods, not trails with signs. Just trees that had grown however they wanted, with brush underneath, fallen logs, patches where the light barely reached the ground. As kids, we were told where we could go and where we couldn't. The boundary was never marked with a fence or anything official. It was more like, don't go past that line of trees, or don't cross the creek and keep going. Stuff like that. And like most kids who grow up in the middle of nowhere, we tested those limits slowly over time. By the time I was in my late teens, early 20s, I knew the woods better than most people. Just from wandering, from helping fix fences, from checking on animals that wandered too far, from killing time. It was quiet out there in a way that's hard to explain to people who didn't grow up with it. Not silent. You always had insects, birds, wind in the leaves, but human noise didn't exist unless someone brought it with them. No neighbors talking. Just land. That day, I remember it being warm. I had been helping my dad with some repairs on one of the old sheds earlier in the morning, replacing a couple of rotting boards, messing with a hinge that never lined up right. Around midday, he realized we were missing one of the younger calves. They wander. Sometimes they push through weak spots in the fence. Sometimes they follow something. Usually we find them within a few hours. I grabbed a water bottle and told him I'd walk the tree line and check the wooded edge. I'd done it plenty of times. I wasn't armed. No gun. Only a small pocket knife I always carried. I wasn't thinking about predators. We didn't have a big problem with dangerous wildlife. Nothing common. I walked along the edge of the pasture first, following a faint trail that animals had worn down over time. You get used to reading small signs, bent grass, broken twigs, slight impressions in dirt. I wasn't tracking in any serious sense, but I knew what to look for. After about 20 minutes with no luck, I stepped into the woods. The temperature dropped, that familiar coolness you get when the canopy blocks the sun. The light changes too. Everything looks a little flatter. Greens turn darker, shadows get thicker. I followed a path I'd taken before, just a route I knew was relatively easy to walk. I was half paying attention, half thinking about random stuff. At some point I realized I couldn't hear the pasture anymore. That probably sounds obvious, but what I mean is, I couldn't hear any of the usual ranch sounds. No distant lowing of cattle, no clanking of metal, no voices. Just woods. That wasn't unusual either, but I remember noticing it. I kept walking. I don't know how long I'd been in there. Time feels different when you're alone in trees. I remember seeing a patch ahead where the trees thinned slightly, like a place where fewer trees had grown close together, letting more light through. And I saw this at first. My brain did what it always does. It tried to assign something normal to it. Deer. That was my first thought. I stopped walking. The movement was low to the ground, something moving between trunks. I only caught glimpses at first. Brownish, grayish. I stood there squinting. It stepped more fully into view. And I remember this very clearly. My brain stalled, like confusion. It looked like a person, not in a clean, obvious way, not like someone standing there waving. It looked like a human body shape, head, torso, arms, legs, but it was on all fours. It was positioned, balanced. hands and feet on the ground, back sort of level, head angled forward. I could see shoulders. I could see what looked like the curve of a spine under skin or clothing. I'm not even sure which. I couldn't tell if it was naked or wearing something skin-colored or dirty. I didn't see a face. The head was turned slightly away from me, and hair or shadow covered most of it. I stood there long enough for my mouth to feel dry. My first actual thought after deer was, someone's messing with me. Hunters. Somebody trying to scare people. But it didn't fit. People don't move like that comfortably. Even people who crawl don't look settled in that position. There's usually tension, shifting, hesitation. This thing looked used to it. It took a few steps forward, hands and feet pressing into the ground, one after the other. I considered calling out, like hi or something. I didn't. I don't know why. I've tried to figure that out. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. Part of me thinks I didn't want confirmation that it could respond. While I was standing there, it stopped. Completely. It felt like it knew I was there. I didn't see it look at me, but I felt noticed. And I hate using that phrase because it sounds dumb. Then it moved. It just went. Not like it faded, not like it ducked behind a tree. It was just gone. I stared at the spot where it had been, trying to understand what I'd just seen. My heart was beating faster at that point. I took a step forward, and I heard a voice. It came from my right, from deeper in the brush. It was clear, just a single word, or maybe two. I still go back and forth on it. It sounded like no, or now, or go. One of those. Short, flat, no emotion in it, not shouted. I didn't even breathe for a second. And then crying. A woman. At least it sounded like a woman. It was crying, heavy, shuddering. The kind of crying that sounds like someone is completely broken down. It came from roughly the same direction as the voice. My brain tried to do something with that. Woman lost in the woods. Woman hurt. Woman being attacked. Someone playing a horrible prank. Nothing fit together. The crying didn't change. And I realized something else. I couldn't hear anything else anymore. No birds. No insects. No wind. Just crying. I turned around, walked fast, then faster. Then I was running. Branches snapped against my arms and face. I didn't try to avoid them. I wasn't following the path anymore. I just went in the direction I thought would take me back toward the pasture. Eventually, I burst out of the tree line into open pasture and kept running. Hit the fence and had to grab onto it to keep from collapsing. My dad came toward me, asking what was wrong. I tried to talk. Nothing came out right away. I finally told him I thought I saw someone in the woods. He grabbed his rifle and told me to stay put. He walked the edge of the woods and came back and said he didn't see anything. We never found the calf either. We talked about calling someone, but without anything concrete to say, it turned into one of those maybe later things. He said sometimes people do weird things, trespassers hiding out. He said it was probably a person. That explanation stuck in the family. It was probably a person. I clung to that explanation for a long time, but it never fully worked. People leave tracks. People make consistent noise. People don't vanish between one step and the next. People don't move on all fours like it's their normal way of moving. I avoided that section of woods after that. Over the years, other small things happened on the ranch. Missing animals, strange noises at night, stuff that could all be explained individually. Nothing as clear as that day. Eventually, I moved out. Life happened, but it never left. I'll be doing something completely unrelated, and I'll suddenly remember the way its back looked, or the exact flatness of the voice, or how the crying didn't sound like it needed help, even though crying usually does. That's another thing that bothers me. If you hear someone crying in pain or fear, there's usually urgency in it, sharpness, panic. This sounded empty, like a recording. And I know that whatever happened that day changed the way I look at places I thought I understood. The woods don't feel neutral to me anymore. They feel like spaces that tolerate us, not places that belong to us. A sense that there are things moving around out there that don't care if we understand them. If you're unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, you notice one. That was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. Because I saw something that did not fit into the world the way I was taught the world works. I don't have a better explanation than that. I'm a man in my mid-30s now, working a steady job and trying to keep a mostly quiet life. What I'm about to describe happened a little over 10 years ago, back when I was in my early 20s and still trying to figure out what direction my life was supposed to take. At the time, money was always tight, and stability felt like something meant for other people. A friend of a friend knew someone who needed a roommate, and that arrangement turned into me moving into an older two-story house. My roommate's name was Shane. He was a few years older than me. He worked nights at a plant, while I worked early mornings, so our schedules barely overlapped. Most days, interaction was limited to a quick nod in the kitchen or a short exchange about whose turn it was to take out the trash. That worked fine for both of us. The arrangement felt simple and low stress, which was exactly what I needed back then. Shane usually left for work around the time I was winding down. Sometimes I'd hear the front door close or his footsteps moving down the hall, but nothing about it ever stood out. Looking back, there were small details that seem strange now, but at the time, they didn't register as anything important. Shane always kept his bedroom door closed. He never had people over. No friends, no family visits, no guests. He also never really talked about his past. Whenever the topic came up, he'd give short, vague answers and gently steer the conversation somewhere else. None of that felt alarming. Some people just prefer privacy. That morning, it was my day off. I woke up later, close to noon, and noticed the house was unusually quiet. That wasn't unheard of. Sometimes Shane picked up extra shifts or stayed out later than normal. What caught my attention was his bedroom door being open. It hadn't been open once since I moved in. I figured he'd forgotten to close it. I walked down the hallway. The door was already halfway open, and I pushed it wider with my fingertips. Shane was lying on his bed. He was on his back, blankets pulled up to his chest, arms resting stiffly at his sides. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. For a moment, it looked like he was sleeping with his eyes open, which didn't make sense but felt less terrifying than the alternative. His skin looked wrong, pale in a way that didn't resemble normal sleep, almost gray. I said his name, no response. I stepped closer and called it again. The air in the room felt heavy, like it had been sitting still for a long time. A sour, metallic smell lingered faintly beneath the usual dusty odor. When I reached out and touched his arm, it was cold. That was the moment it clicked. Panic took over. My hands started shaking so badly I could barely pull my phone out of my pocket. I stumbled backward into the hallway while dialing emergency services, trying to explain what I'd found through uneven breaths. Paramedics arrived. They asked me questions while working on him, but I could tell from their faces there was nothing to be done. After some time, one of the officers gently told me Shane had passed away, most likely due to a medical issue. Later, I learned he'd had an undiagnosed heart condition. No signs of foul play, no signs of a struggle, just gone. The rest of that day blurred together, giving statements. Sitting on the front steps while strangers moved through the house, watching them carry his body out on a stretcher. By nightfall, the house felt hollow. Shane's family came to collect his belongings. They were polite and just as reserved as he'd been. Within a week, his room was empty. The landlord told me I could either find another roommate or cover the full rent myself. I chose to stay alone. Part of that decision came from practicality. Moving costs money I didn't have. Another part came from not wanting a stranger in the house after everything that had happened. As strange as it sounds, being alone felt easier than starting over with someone new. The house was quieter than ever, but I adjusted. I kept to my routine, worked my shifts, came home, and tried not to think about what had happened in the room down the hall. Occasionally, my eyes would drift toward Shane's door as I walked past it. I kept it closed, just like he always had. Sleep became a little harder, like a persistent restlessness. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and lie there staring at the ceiling, listening to the subtle noises old houses make. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. One night, a few months after Shane passed, something changed. I woke up sometime after midnight. No obvious reason. Everything felt weird. Then I heard laughter. Sounded like it was coming from somewhere in the house. A man's voice. My half-asleep brain tried to rationalize it. Someone walking down the street talking on a phone. But the sound didn't fade. It drifted slowly, unevenly, like someone chuckling to themselves. The laughter didn't sound happy. It sounded strained, uncomfortable. The sound seemed to be coming from the living room. A few seconds passed, maybe like a minute. The laughter stopped. Silence filled the house again. I rolled onto my side, facing the bedroom door, and stared into the darkness. Something touched my shoulder, like the light press of fingertips. Every muscle in my body locked up. The sensation was unmistakable, warm, real. Slowly, I turned my head toward the side of the bed. Nothing was there. The room was empty. My door was still closed. No movement, no sound. I didn't know where to go. The house felt equally unsafe in every direction. I turned on the lamp and scanned every corner. Nothing. No one. In the days that followed, I told myself it had been a stress response. Lack of sleep, my brain filling in gaps with imagined sensations. That explanation held barely. Things started happening. The faint sound of movement in the hallway when I knew I was alone. The feeling of being watched when sitting in the living room. Occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of something in my peripheral vision, only for it to vanish when I looked directly at it. None of it was dramatic enough to prove anything. All of it was just enough to make me feel constantly on edge. The breaking point came on a night when I got off work later than usual. It was close to midnight when I pulled into the driveway. Unlocking the front door, stepping inside, and flipping on the living room light had become automatic. That night, the light revealed something on the couch. Someone was sitting there. At first glance, my brain assumed it was Shane. That didn't make sense. Shane was dead. The figure's body shape matched him. Same build, same hair. My eyes adjusted. The body was twisted. The head was turned completely backward, fully facing behind. The face stared directly at me. The mouth hung open. The eyes were open. Every detail was wrong. The neck looked stretched, elongated, bent in a way that shouldn't be physically possible. My vision tunneled. The last thing I remember is a wave of dizziness and the floor rushing up toward me. When consciousness returned, I was lying on my back near the front door. The living room light was still on. The couch was empty. I didn't question it. My body moved on instinct. Staggering to my feet, I ran out of the house, got into my car, and drove. I don't remember where I went. Only that I kept driving. Later that day, I called the landlord and told him I was done. I never went back. Most of my possessions stayed behind. None of it felt worth retrieving. Years have passed since then. I've tried to analyze what happened, tried to find logical explanations. Maybe my mind broke under pressure and filled the silence with things that weren't real. The problem is how real it felt. The weight of that hand on my shoulder. The clarity of that face on the couch. Those memories haven't faded. To this day, I don't know what actually happened in that house. The apartment complex sat on the edge of town, where the pavement gave way to gravel and pine needles, a place that technically counted as student housing, but felt more like a cluster of old cabins that had been converted into rentals. I was 22, finishing my last year at a small college tucked into the foothills of a mountain range in northern Colorado. Most of my life revolved around classes, my part-time job at a cafe downtown, and trying to figure out what I was supposed to do after graduation. Moving there had been a practical decision. Rent closer to campus was higher, and I didn't own a car. The complex was within walking distance of both the bus stop and a strip of small shops where I worked. It wasn't pretty, but it was affordable, and I told myself that being near the mountains probably meant it was quieter and safer than living closer to the highway. The unit was a one-bedroom on the second floor, with a narrow balcony that overlooked the parking lot and a row of trees beyond it. Most of the other tenants were students or young couples. You'd see someone carrying groceries up the stairs or heading out with a backpack, exchange a nod, and that was about it. Nothing stood out. Morning classes, afternoon shifts at the cafe, evenings spent studying or watching shows with my door locked and headphones on. Occasionally I'd walk into town instead of taking the bus if the weather was decent. The path followed a narrow road that curved along the edge of the woods before opening up into the main street. It was early evening. Traffic was light. Halfway through the walk, footsteps started to register behind me. They blended into everything else. Gravel crunches all sound similar out there, but after a minute or two, the rhythm stayed consistent. Just there. A glance over my shoulder showed a man walking like 30 feet back. He looked ordinary in a way that made him hard to describe. Hands in his pockets. People walk that road, I reminded myself. It connects the housing area to town. It's not strange. So I kept going. A bend in the road came up where the trees pressed closer on both sides and the streetlights were spaced farther apart. My pace naturally picked up a little, the way it does when you realize you're alone somewhere darker than you expected to be. The footsteps behind me picked up too. Another quick look back confirmed he was still there. The distance hadn't changed much, but the timing of our steps felt matched. When I slowed slightly, he slowed. When I sped up, he did too. By the time the outline of the apartment buildings came into view, my hands were damp with sweat. Relief started to creep in. Lights were on in some windows. A car pulled into the lot. Normal life existed there. Turning into the complex, I headed toward my building. The stairs were at the far end, near a cluster of bushes and a small maintenance shed. The man turned in behind me. At that point, pretending nothing was wrong became impossible. Instinct told me to break into a run, but another part of my brain insisted that doing so would make things worse. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, I took them two at a time. At the top, the door to my unit was halfway down the exterior hallway. Before I reached it, the footsteps stopped. A glance over my shoulder showed the man standing at the top of the stairs. He wasn't moving closer. He was watching. We locked eyes. No words were exchanged. No gestures. After a few seconds that felt much longer, he turned around and walked back down the stairs, disappearing into the dimness of the parking lot. Inside my apartment, the deadbolt clicked into place, and I leaned against the door, trying to slow my breathing. Nothing actually happened. Maybe he lived in the complex. Maybe he realized he was going the wrong way. Sleep came in short, shallow bursts that night. Over the next few days, the man didn't appear again. Tension gradually loosened its grip, until the second incident. It was afternoon, broad daylight, when I left the cafe after a shorter shift. The sun hung low but bright. A couple of customers lingered inside, and someone was sweeping near the entrance. The walk home felt safe enough. Cars passed regularly. A few people moved between shops. About 2 blocks from the cafe, a dark car slowed beside me. I assumed the driver was looking for parking. The car rolled forward, then stopped again, matching my pace. The passenger side window slid down. A man leaned across from the driver's seat. He looked to be in his 30s, short hair, stubble, neutral expression. "Hey," he said, "you need a ride?" My immediate response was a firm, "No, thank you." The window stayed down. "You sure? It's a bit of a walk from here." "I'm good," I said, keeping my voice cool and my eyes forward. The car idled beside me for a few more seconds before slowly pulling ahead and turning the corner. A wave of relief passed through me. That relief didn't last. Half a block later, the same car came around from a side street, pulling up behind me. This time, it didn't stop right next to me. It trailed me at a slow crawl. I turned onto a busier street, hoping traffic would discourage him. The car followed. After about a minute, it accelerated, passed me, and continued down the road. My shoulders sagged. Maybe he'd given up. Maybe he'd realized I wasn't interested. Another turn brought me closer to my apartment complex. The street here was quieter, lined with trees and a few small houses. The dark car appeared again, pulling up ahead of me and stopping near the curb. Both front doors opened. The man from the passenger seat stepped out. The driver got out too. And standing there beside the first man was the same person who had followed me to my apartment days earlier. Recognition hit like ice water. My body locked up. The world narrowed to the sound of my own heartbeat and the sight of those two men standing between me and the direction I needed to go. Then, survival instinct took over. I just ran, toward the cluster of small shops at the edge of the street. I burst inside, nearly colliding with a man exiting. "Help," came out of my mouth. A couple of customers turned. Through the glass, the two men stood near the curb. They didn't come inside. They just watched for a moment. Then both walked back to the car. The car pulled away, disappearing down the road. My legs felt weak enough that I had to grab onto a shelf to keep from sinking to the floor. We called the police. Sitting on the edge of the store's counter while waiting felt surreal. Officers arrived. I gave descriptions. They took it very seriously. But no arrests were made. After that, I didn't walk alone. If I couldn't arrange a ride or a bus, I didn't go. The apartment never felt the same. I finished the semester, packed my things, and moved back in with my parents. I wonder if those men were opportunists who saw a young woman walking alone and decided to test boundaries. I wonder if they had noticed me earlier, maybe from the cafe, maybe from the complex, and were waiting for a moment.